Well, I'm glad you're here today. How about you? One of the most enjoyable things that a pastor gets to do is perform weddings. I invite you to think about your own wedding or weddings, depending on how many you've had, or the weddings that you have put on. You know, weddings are very expensive things, if you know this, and there's no such thing as an inexpensive wedding. Connie and I have tried. We've tried 5 times and failed all 5 times. They're expensive. There's a lot of work. But if you think of your own wedding, do you remember the joy of all of that? I mean, it's just so much fun to be around a whole group of people where they're all laughing, they're all having a great time together. There's all of these stories. There's so much hope, so much giddy joy. I love being around it. And it's for the wedding couple, it's all their favorite people from all the parts of their life, their childhood friends and their college buddies and their young, or if they're married later in life, it's your kids and your grandkids. In other words, all the same people who would attend your funeral, except this time you get to go yourself, and they bring presents, and there's dancing and laughter and wine. It's so much better than a funeral, but it's the same people. So it's this wonderful, giddy kind of joy. And our story today is Jesus beginning his public ministry at a wedding. Of all the debutante moments he might have picked, he picked a wedding as the grand opening, his out of the chute moment that he's going to say, here's who I am. It's a wedding. So if you get the idea that Jesus was some kind of sour, over the edge, kind of hoping no one's having a good time kind of Messiah, you missed him. He was at a wedding, and I don't think he was against the wall, angry that people were dancing. He'd have been right out in the middle of that whole band scene. He's a joyous Messiah, and I invite you to joy today. The picture that you see is from our good friend Michael Belk, who in a previous life was a fashion photographer, has used his talents now to juxtapose pictures of a first century Jesus with modern day life. In fact, this image here of Jesus with the bride at Cana of Galilee is one of the new images in the new book that he's got. It's available in our book center. I invite you to go look at that and buy one of those. But it's a wonderful image, and I invite you to the joy of this day, thinking about even your own wedding, the wonderful things that happened, and maybe the weird things that happened as well. Because sometimes things go wrong at weddings, right? Well, here's an example. John chapter 2, verse 1. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what has that to do with you and me?" I'll return to that in a minute. "My hour has not yet come." His mother then said to the servants, "Just do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone or plastic water jars of water for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons of water. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them all the way up to the brim. And then he said to the servants, "Now draw some out and take it to the wine steward." And so they took it. And when the wine steward tasted the water that had now become wine, but he didn't know where it came from, though the servants knew, who drew the water knew, the steward then called the groom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become so drunk that they can't tell." But you're supposed to laugh. That's the punchline. "But you," he said, "you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Friends, this is the word of the Lord today. Thanks be to God. What could go wrong at a wedding? You spend all this time getting ready for it. I performed a wedding 2 weeks ago where the bride had been working on her wedding since she was a flower girl at age 5. All 27 bridesmaids' dresses, she was taking notes about what she'd do for her wedding. Sometimes a wedding is a lifetime of planning, and most of the time it's a lifetime of saving, right? All blown in one single moment. Weddings are so organized, and there's all the professionals who are there to help you. And so, of course, they're going to go off perfectly, right? What could go wrong having children and maybe pets and groomsmen who act like children, and then add some alcohol, and then people who are not used to being up in front of each other and might faint, and, well, you get the picture. Things are going to go wrong. In fact, I've been collecting things that have gone wrong in weddings, and I'd like to hear your story as you head out today, and I'll add that to the 11 o'clock service and make it even better. But here are the things I've heard so far. See if you hear your wedding in one of these. So there was the wedding where there was an outdoor by a lake, and some guys were going along in jet skis, and right about the ceremony, they were yelling from the jet skis, "Man, don't do it, don't do it." Or the minister's toupee that flew off in a gust of wind at a beach wedding, a seagull picked it up and flew off, and no one could hear anything else he said after that. Or the priest, who's right in the middle of the sacred part of the service, and someone's cell phone, you know how they are, they pick the worst time. The cell phone goes off and it keeps on going and keeps on going. Finally, the priest, just mad, just stopped the whole thing and lectured everybody about the appropriate etiquette and the holy moment. And then, of course, it was in his pocket. And, you know, there are times when, like the guy who's trying to say, "I take you as my lawfully wedded wife," but he said, "my waffly wedded wife." And so every anniversary after that, she makes him waffles, and 57 waffles later, they're still together. Sometimes they're just funny little things. It's people who faint or people called by the wrong name, or, you know, there's one groom, he was trying to struggling with his vows, couldn't get it, and the people didn't really know, they were just watching, but all of a sudden the bride just popped him in the head. They didn't know that she was trying to swat a mosquito, but it looked like, the beginning of a rocky marriage. So things can go wrong. Things always go wrong, right? That's just the way it is with weddings. Well, now a first century wedding was like our wedding except on steroids, all right? It was a 7-day event, all right? It went on and on and on, 7 days. And in a Palestinian first century peasant wedding, you really did genuinely spend your entire life and all of your savings to put on the wedding. So for the bride and the groom and their families, this was the event of a lifetime. Now, you need to know that Palestinian peasants in the first century didn't drink wine. Their happy hour was like 1 hour in their life. The only time they drank wine was at a wedding. They might grow grapes to sell to kings, but they didn't drink wine. They drank water every day. They didn't have meat on a normal occasion. They would have maybe fish, but they would just have bread and olive oil. That was the daily diet of the poor, but the wealthy, the kings, did that. But for one brief moment, one little foretaste of heaven, when they put on a wedding, then the peasants could eat and drink and dance like kings and queens. And because of that, for one brief moment, to take off that overworked, underpaid, overtaxed, underappreciated life and just dance your heart away. The Bible is full of Old Testament and New Testament images that describe heaven as this one great long wedding where the wine flows and the meat of all kind is there. And heaven is really where all the things that are rare here are abundant there. Gold becomes pavement. Pearls become gates. Time becomes eternity. But for a wedding in the little town of Cana, which is only about 8 miles north of Nazareth, little one-horse town with a 1A football team. It's just a little town, not probably one stoplight at most. And so the whole town is gathered. In fact, even some people from down in Nazareth were there. So Jesus' mother, little known fact, the Gospel of John never calls her name Mary. If you didn't have the other Gospels, you wouldn't know it. She pops up in the Gospel of John often, but always called the mother of Jesus, the mother of Jesus. We know her name is Mary from the other Gospels, but Mary is there. Jesus and his disciples have been invited, and he comes. He's not so busy he can't come to a wedding. I think he liked a good time. G.K. Chesterton, author, said that he's often thought that one of the great surprises about God is his sense of humor. Jesus came to show us a God with a smile, a God with a dance and a laugh. So he comes to a wedding, yeah. And so they're in the middle of the wedding. It's the third day. Now, if you're a Christian and you're thinking, all right, Jesus did a lot of stuff on the third day. That's why those Easter banners are still up. It's the third day, but it's also the third day in the middle of a week. So we're at Wednesday, and the wine ran out. Ooh, this is not good. I mean, how many of you know you would never get out on the dance floor if it weren't for the wine, right? So you can't have the wine give out. You just can't have that. It's just a terrible thing because this was what the whole deal was about. You can't go dry for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. This is not good. So this is the faux pas of the century. There's my French word, memory word for the day. So this is a social scandal. It's going to be written up. Every time anybody talks about John and Susie or Joachim and Sarah, from then on, they're going to say, that's the couple that the wine ran out on Wednesday. So this is going to follow them forever. And so Jesus' mother is verklempt about this. Somehow she knows about it, and the word is about to get out. They just don't know it yet. The party doesn't know yet, but somehow Jesus' mother knows they're out of wine. And so she comes to her son, who's just shown up with 12 guys, none of whom brought any wine apparently. And she comes and she says, she just, I don't know, I don't have a recording of it, so I don't know how she said it, but somehow she says, they have no wine. Now, you know this. Many times, especially your mother or other significant others you might live with, when they give you a statement, it doesn't have to be a command for it to really be a command, right? It may not say it in the text, but what she's saying is, do something. So like when you're at home and your spouse says, the trash is full. This is not an observation about the contents of a trash can. This is reminding you that on Tuesday and Friday, your job is to take the trash can out to the curb, and it is Tuesday. And if you're going to have any pleasant Wednesdays, you better pick up on the command. I'm going to change this sermon by the next service when Connie's here, but you know what I'm talking about. And so Jesus' mother is pretty well saying to him, son, you do something. At least you and the 12 guys go to 7-Eleven and bring some boxed wine, but they're out of wine. And this is serious. What did she think he was going to do? I don't know. Did she have some premonition that maybe he could turn water into wine? I don't know. Had she been watching him practice in the backyard as a teenager? I don't know. We don't have any of the accounts of Jesus' young adulthood, but now he's 30 years old. Now he's beginning his public ministry, he's just gathering his disciples, not even finished with that yet. He shows up at this wedding, which is a fun thing because he loves the joy of this. They're out of wine. Son, they're out of wine. And he says, woman, what does that have to do with you and me? Now, friends, this is one of those don't try this at home things. We are 2 weeks away from Mother's Day, and I assure you, if you go down to CVS, you will not find a Mother's Day card that says, woman, back off. Love your son, Alan. So what is he doing here? I mean, this is not a Hallmark card moment at all. Is Jesus being rude to his mother? But the truth is, however, again, I don't know the tone of voice. There's a lot of difference between woman, and woman, it's probably softer than that. In fact, I have a hunch it really is, because he will address her the very same way at the end of this gospel in John chapter 19 as he hangs on the cross. With very few words he can gasp out in that moment, but one of them is to her, and he says, woman, behold your son. And he points to the beloved disciple. And with his last breath, he takes care of her for the rest of her life. For extra points, there's one other woman in the Gospel of John, not his mother, but another woman named Mary, that he also addressed as woman. Anybody know what that one is? You get extra points and you can leave the service early if you know. Good, no one got it. You have to stay. It's Mary Magdalene as he rises on Easter morning, and she's there weeping. And the risen Jesus says, woman, why are you seeking the living among the dead? So maybe woman is a little softer than it comes across, but the truth is, there is a bit of a stiff arm to this. Mary has been, perhaps by now Joseph has passed away, we don't know. But Mary has been a primary voice in his life, all of his life, earthly life. She's been the one guiding, directing. He's been obedient to her. Even his mother, though. Even his mother, this primary relationship in his life. But on this day, he has to say to her, kind of, Mom, I love you. I get it. I hear what you're telling me. But I need to let you know it's not my hour. It's not the time. And what does he mean by this? Because actually Jesus has a clock going in his head. But she can't wind his clock. She can't set his time. She wants to, she means to, she's anxious about the wedding going bad, and not that that doesn't matter to him too. But what he knows is if this is his moment, if he crosses the Rubicon and he goes public with this ability and this calling, there's no going back. He will set in motion the clock that winds down to his hour. And what is his hour? In the Gospel of John, he comes up frequently. The hour actually is the hour of his death and resurrection. It's on the night before he died that he finally got his disciples together and said, okay, now my hour has come. But now this is early in the gospel. Is he going to let it begin now? Because this heavenly divinity has been fermenting within his mind and spirit in the cask of his life for 30 years. Is this going to be the moment he's going to uncork that and go public? Will it be now? Because the truth is, it's not like someone's bleeding out through the aorta. Okay, this is going to be a faux pas, but really, is this the moment? And the answer is going to be yes, but he does tap the brakes. He doesn't let her decide it. And by the way, wouldn't it be great if, like Jesus, we could keep from absorbing everyone else's anxiety all around us? Have you ever been around someone that their anxiety and their urgency has to become yours? I want it done, and I want it done right now, right? Rudyard Kipling, remember, wrote that wonderful poem, If, to his 12-year-old son John, in the opening couplet. If you can keep your head about you when everyone around you is losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, yet make an allowance for their doubting too. Anyway, this is the beginning of adulthood. Jesus does not absorb her anxiety. Good counsel for us here. But he does pause. This is the first of 3 times in the Gospel of John. Interesting. The first of 3 times where someone very close to Jesus asked him to do something that was totally logical, and he said no. And then turned right around and did it after he said no. Because he's going to turn around and turn the water into wine. By the way, part of the joke is, you notice the brute here, he might have turned it into brute champagne. That might have been the case. But, but he is going to do it. But at first he says no and then does it. Here's the second one, by the way. His brothers, his family come to him in John chapter 7 and say, it's time to go up to the feast. It's Passover. Time to go up. If you're ever going to go, you go at Passover to Jerusalem. Let's go. We've done it all your life. And Jesus, for some reason, says, no, I'm not going. They left. Then after they left, Jesus said to his disciples, okay, let's go up to Jerusalem for the Passover. And they're just whipsawed, thinking, what? And then in chapter 11, his very closest friend, Lazarus, the one he loves, it says, his 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, sent him urgent, flashing sirens, EMT need. The one you love is sick unto death. Come now. And he says, no, not coming now. And he waits 3 days. And then he says to the disciples, let's go see Lazarus. What? What's going on here? Is Jesus just having trouble making up his mind? Is he just being stubborn? No. In each case, though he does do the thing, in each case he reveals his glory, but in each case it only happens on the Father's clock. It's not actually a disrespect for mother or family or closest friends. In fact, it's great respect. It's saying that even those primary, dear, warm relationships, as dear as they are to him and to us, they're not more important to him than his obedience and his life in accordance with the clock that only his Father in heaven could set for him. Well, somehow Mary must have had a sense. She didn't know what he's going to do. I don't know, but she just said to the servants, just do whatever he tells you. Just do whatever he says. So he says to them, all right, we got these pots, and they were about this size. They were made of stone, because that way, if it was clay, that didn't maintain the purity, ritual purity in the Jewish system. Because what you would do, these were filled with water, and you would just sort of wipe your hands and do the cleanliness on the outside, because you eat with your hands in that century, but also because it demonstrated that by clean on the outside, you were trying to always be before God clean on the inside. Now, Jesus sometimes had to kind of poke on people about that, saying you can clean everything on the outside but still have a dirty heart or a dirty mind. So what defiles you comes from inside of you, not outside of you, right? So it's not enough just to be clean on the outside, but that's what these were used for. And by Wednesday, probably some of the barrels were a little bit low, so Jesus says to the servants, fill them back up. I'm sure they were thinking, okay, you're just a wedding guest, we're not taking orders from you, but they did it. Maybe they were scared of Jesus' mom. And so they fill them up. So how many trips to the well did that represent? To fill them all the way back up, all the way to the brim. And there's 6 of them. It's not 7, so it's kind of one short of the perfect number. That's kind of the idea here is, as important as that is, water and purity, Jesus had come to give them even more. The enemy of greatness for us is settling for good. We get satisfied too easily. And God is trying to invite us to more. So without letting him know what he's going to do, he doesn't tip the glass and say, okay, everybody, we're about to do a miracle. Everybody, hey, stop the music. He doesn't call attention to himself. There's no fanfare. In fact, this early sign is done so privately that Jesus doesn't even get the credit for it. The only ones who know are his disciples and his mother and some pretty confused servants. Even the wine steward doesn't know where the wine came from. And imagine the scene. As the servants dip the water, he said, okay, now dip it and take it to the sommelier. There's my second French word. Take it to the wine steward. You know that wine steward. Every great restaurant has that sommelier. They speak 5 languages. They at least make you think they've been to every winery in the world and know them all by name. They're the wine spectator person behind the scenes. And I love this person at a restaurant because whatever wine you order, they have to say the same thing. Sir, what would you like? I think I'll have the $2 chuck, I say. And the sommelier has to say, excellent choice, sir. He despises me at that moment that I did not pick the 300 bottle, but excellent choice. So that's this guy. You got this guy in your mind? He spent 10 years becoming a sommelier. So he's the wine expert at the wedding. And so he's the one who's if the wine goes out, he's the one who writes it up in the Wine Spectator and also the gossip column. So this is not a good guy to embarrass. But they bring this water, and the servants are bound to be scared to death. They probably work for this guy. He can tell the difference between watered down wine, but he sure knows the difference between water and wine, and we're about to bring him water? Can you imagine how frightened they must have been? Because again, we don't know when the water became the wine. We don't really know. But at least by the time it got to the lips of that sommelier, and everybody's thinking, the servants, and everybody's thinking, oh no. And he says, oh my goodness, this is divine. Yeah, if only he knew. This is out of this world. This is the best wine I have ever tasted in my life. And so he's looking for who to give credit to. And it is meant to be a joke. I'm glad you laughed because it's funny. He calls the groom, and the groom is clueless because all grooms are clueless. But he calls the groom over, and he gives the groom credit or kind of mocks him a little bit. And of course, the groom he takes credit for it. Yeah, that's the way I roll, But he says to the groom, I've been doing this a long time, and no one ever served this nice a wine, but whatever the best wine they had, they served that on day one when people came parched and with a fresh palate. By Wednesday or Thursday, you're offering them the stuff out of the box. But I can't believe that here toward the end of the week, you're bringing out this vintage? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And that's the way the story ends, except Jesus and the disciples leave town, and this is what the signs are for. John 20 makes this plain. All of the signs in John were so that we might believe. Jesus reveals himself that we might believe or faith in him. Pastor Sue, in his introduction to the Gospel of John on our Life Academy video, I hope you've seen it, but he made the point that The verb faith is never used in the Gospel of John. I'm sorry, the noun faith, you don't have faith. But the verb for faith is used 89 times, of which this is one of them. Faith is something you do. It's a trust in a relationship. It isn't something you have. Or maybe you could say it has you instead. So the disciples believed in him because they at least saw this kind of miracle done in secret. So he does begin his public work, but it's not very public yet. And what is he trying to say to us? Where are you in this story besides a little thirsty? I wonder, when was it in your life that your wine gave out? When the thing that you thought you could trust to take you all the way to the end let you down. It might have been your good looks. It might have been your intelligence. It might have been your physical strength. It might have been the relationship that you thought would last forever. It might have been the stock market you thought would keep going up. When did life turn on you? When did your wine run out? Jesus comes to you in this story at that moment. And he comes with giddy, exaggerated abundance. He didn't just give them one good glass of wine. He didn't just give them one barrel full of wine. He gave them 6 barrels full of wine, 180 gallons. That would be 800 bottles of the finest, most heavenly vintage that has ever come out. And really, what is a miracle? God's always turning water into wine, rain and dew gradually, Wine gradually gets better over time. C.S. Lewis said the miracles are simply God speeding up what God normally does slowly. He just sped up, 78 RPM if you're my generation. He just sped up what normally takes a lot longer, but look how much of it he made. I mean, my goodness, it's almost like just showing off. But that's the whole point. Jesus was always surrounded by people who could only see scarcity. There's not enough food to feed this multitude. Oh, watch what I'm going to do with loaves and fishes, There's always surrounded by people who think there's not enough. And when you don't think there's enough in life, then you get anxious. And you begin to call the wagons into a circle, and your world gets smaller and smaller, and you feel like you're surrounded by competitors, and someone's always reaching for your pocket, and you're nervous about the future. What about if we're wrong? What about if Jesus is right, and in fact, the world is wired around abundance? What about if this extravagant, generous, joyous God that Jesus represents is saying, there's plenty. There's plenty in life, and not only is there plenty, here's the great news. God serves the best last. If you like dessert, you know what I mean. There are a lot of times when we get the impression that the best days are behind us. Well, how do we talk? Can't wait for this pandemic to be over. I want things to get what? Back to normal. Friends, the world doesn't go back. God calls us forward. Your best days are not behind you, friends. Oh yeah, the good old days are back when the kids were home. Those were fun. The kids were always obedient, made all A's in school, never disrespected us. Those were great days. Or, oh man, I wish we were back in Michigan. I miss the snow. Down here in Florida, all this dang paradise every day. Maybe it's more serious than that. I remember back when my husband was alive and all the joy we had back when I pulled down 2 coffee cups in the morning instead of 1. Life has a lot of changes in it. But if we're not careful, we'll think that the best ones are over, which leads to despair. And worse than that, it means missing this joyous invitation from Christ that says, hey, lift up your eyes and your heart. I've still got the best for you. It is still coming. I have come that you might have life, he said, and have it more abundantly. I want you to have an abundant life, not just squeak to the end and limp across the finish. I want you to come soaring out of here. And it doesn't mean that you'll always be wealthy. It doesn't mean that you won't have any trouble in your life. Look what happened to him. But it does mean that your life can have this taste of heaven now. The truth is, no matter what you go through, the best really is yet to come. What would it be like if instead of sipping along on the water, and nothing wrong with water, I mean in an arid country like Israel, they loved water, but what about if you have been living and I have been living so much less than I could have? What about if God wanted to turn the water into wine? How good would that be? Right? Yeah. Cheers, friends. The best is yet to be. Do you believe this? Let's pray. Oh Lord, thank you for this story. Its surprise endings, its joyous invitation. Grant that we will look up and look at the journey ahead, not just behind. Look at the journey ahead without anxiety, without fear, but in fact with giddy joy, because the best is still coming if we're in you. Help us live a life abundant you keep holding out to us. Some little taste of heaven now. We pray in the one who told the story and lived it out in front of us, even Jesus our Lord. Amen.